Good morning. As Clint mentioned, I am Emma Hand, and I'm a partner in the Dentons Energy practice. I have the great honor and privilege this morning to introduce to you Special Envoy and Coordinator of International Energy Affairs, Mr. Amos Hochstein. Throughout his career, Mr. Hochstein has been a respected and accomplished thought leader in the nexus between energy and national security. Prior to joining the State Department, Mr. Hochstein spent more than 15 years on Capitol Hill advising elected individuals, including Senator Mark Warner and former Senator Christopher Dodd, along with serving as a senior policy advisor to the House Foreign Relations Committee. He has also had significant experience in the private sector, counseling domestic and international energy companies on the development of renewable energy, alternative sources of power, and the best strategies to bring them to market. In 2011, Mr. Hochstein joined the State Department as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy Diplomacy, and in this role, he led global efforts in energy diplomacy, administering the Office of Middle East and Asia and the Office of Europe and the Western Hemisphere and Africa. In 2014, the Secretary of State John Kerry appointed Mr. Hochstein as the Special Envoy and Coordinator of International Energy Affairs for the Bureau of Energy Resources. As the department's special envoy, Mr. Hochstein is the U.S.'s chief energy diplomat at a critical moment with significant transformations in the energy sector that are having substantial economic, environmental, and geopolitical impacts. Mr. Hochstein has dedicated his career towards promoting energy responsibility and security and continues this critical work today. Please join me in welcoming Special Envoy and Coordinator for International Energy Affairs, Mr. Amos Hochstein.
Wow, thanks for that introduction. I almost didn't recognize myself in that introduction. Clint, that was very informative, and I'm still left with your first slide of Dentons. That was entirely impressive. So congratulations. And thank you for inviting me to speak today on this topic, which is obviously near and dear to my heart, not only as my professional responsibilities, but actually something I wake up every day believing in. And that is the role of the United States in the energy revolution that we're going through and transformation that we're going through around the world, and the interconnection of energy and national security. Now, that's not a new phenomenon, that interconnection, but I think it has been more significant and more clear in the last few years, and increasingly so, than it has been probably since the early mid-'70s when we went through the Arab oil boycott. And that's what I want to talk about a little bit today. To put it simply, the United States is the world's energy superpower. That's as simple as I can put it. Now, the question becomes, why are we that superpower? And why do I think what makes us a superpower in energy? And that's in oil and in gas and renewables across the board. In just the past few years, the United States emerged as the leader, as we just heard, in oil and gas, but also in solar, geothermal, and wind. We're setting groundbreaking energy efficiency standards for the transport, buildings, and industrial sectors. We're also a leader in research and development of innovative energy technologies, and we're pioneering the business models and financial tools that enable technology deployment, not just the innovation itself. The investment in renewables in 2015 alone in the United States was $56 billion, the highest it's ever been. The United States now produces more petroleum than Saudi Arabia, and more gas than Russia. That would have been unfathomable just a couple of years ago. In the past 8 years, solar power generation is up more than 20-fold, and wind power has more than tripled. And $58 billion is saved in the United States annually by utility customers due to energy efficiency standards. Any way you look at the world energy, the United States is the leader, and the world is looking to us for leadership. To understand the broader energy changes underway, the worst thing one can do is to do what Clint warned us of earlier today, and that is listen to prognosticators, projections, and analysts. We should listen to them as they are more accurately reflecting today's thinking about energy. But as far as predictive power, I would suggest you look elsewhere, or don't. We talk about today lower for longer, and that's what most analysts today write about, except for those analysts who say we're going to be at $100 in a couple of years. So you can take your pick. One investment bank in 2014 wrote a note to its clients, and this is one of the largest banks in America, that quote, $100 was the new oil price floor for the future. That was, I believe, in May of 2014. $100 is the new floor for the future. We're never going below 100. And it was backed by significant data. It wasn't just a statement. Obviously, we went to $27. I think we hit $26 to $28 a few months ago. And in the last just in the last 6 months, we went from 28 to 58. Yesterday, we spent a few hours at 39. So that just shows you where we are as far as the volatility in oil prices and the predictability of oil prices. And if I could predict the oil price and come here today and give you what I think the price is going to be, I'd probably not be working at the State Department. I'd be working elsewhere. But there's one thing I could be certain of, that the projections of both financial analysts and oil company executives they're not maliciously wrong, but they are wrong, and can make the case for either scenario. And that's because if you look at the data of supply and demand as it is, you can reach a certain conclusion that over the next 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a creeping and increase in oil price because we're going to come back into balance and demand will continue to grow and outpace supply. But it is also true that the national security events, accidents, and other kinds of interruptions that can happen in the middle are not being taken into account and cannot be taken into account. But it is also true that we're no longer in that same landscape that we were before of a linear narrative. What Clint showed before in some of his slides are all these game changers that are happening right now. The world has changed. And I think that the fundamental change that we've seen is this interaction between the hydrocarbon industry and the renewable industry with some new innovations that we already know are coming, like storage. We just don't know exactly when and in what shape. And that is what is going to create this tension of the predictability of oil and gas pricing, as we really do not know what that future is, what efficiency is going to lead us to, and how can we do more with less, and what is demand. When people talk about the demand coming into balance with supply, that's in the short term. But where are we on the long term of supply and demand is going to be far more dependent on what does happen with renewables, what happens with storage. How long can they go without depending on a base load? That is going to be probably gas in most cases. Here in Washington, I think we're the last city on the planet, in Washington, D.C., where we still talk about fossil fuels versus renewables as some kind of zero-sum game. It is not one or the other. It's going to have to be both, because we're going to need the base load and we're going to need fuels that will transition us to that future. How long that transition is, I don't know. But it's going to be a considerable amount of time. Now, when we talk about investments, and we talked about the $56 billion, just remember, nobody is making $56 billion worth of investments in renewables based on ideology. It's based on economics, and they're all expecting to make a return on it. So it is no longer the discussion of Washington, D.C. of renewables. If you're talking about renewables, you're here as conducting, as I've been accused of, conducting a war on hydrocarbons, and it is not that I'm trying to kill the climate because I talk about gas when I walk around the world. Both are economic and both are necessary, one for the other. And look, the world changes are clear. You know, a few years ago, the world stopped everything it was doing whenever the oil ministers met at OPEC in Vienna, and we all waited with bated breath to see what the the wise men, I was going to say, I'm so used to saying wise men and women, but it's the wise men that would say what they would say in Vienna. That's not the case anymore. It's more important what happens here in the United States and more broadly in the Americas than what's happening in Vienna and OPEC. And that's a significant change, and that's part of the emergence of the United States as a superpower. But we have to understand what's happening in to look a little bit further in the shale revolution in the United States that made all this happen and made all this possible. Washington County in Pennsylvania is as important as Washington, D.C., or far more important when it comes to gas. And that's why recently we sent 20 young American diplomats to Washington County, Pennsylvania, as part of an energy training program. The Marcellus production is at 18 billion cubic feet per day. If you want to understand global energy markets, you got to look at the shale oil revolution in North Dakota, where some members of my team are going to be flying out to North Dakota, to Bismarck, tonight. That's not a normal destination for the State Department or for diplomats to go out to North Dakota. But if you want to understand the role that we're playing in the world and want to understand what the rest of the world is looking at us, you have to go there. Today, just to give you a little bit of a sense, Pennsylvania, the state of Pennsylvania, produces as much gas as China, as much gas as Norway and Saudi Arabia. Texas produces 3.2 million barrels of oil per day. That's more than Kuwait, Mexico, or Brazil. And North Dakota produces 1 million barrels a day. That's more than Azerbaijan and more than Colombia. That's just Texas. But if I asked a question in this room, what's the state that is leading the United States in renewable energy? Usually the answers I get are Oregon, Washington State, Vermont, Maine. You know why? Because think about what I said a minute ago. Everybody thinks this is about ideology. Everything this is about politics, right versus left. It's not. It's about economics. And that means that Texas is the capital. The oil capital of America is also the capital of renewable energy. And if you think about it, they're producing wind power at 53 gigawatt hours annually. 25% of all U.S. wind is in Texas. It's the 6th in the world in installed wind capacity, right behind Spain, and I believe they'll overtake Spain very soon, since we have 20 new wind farms under construction in Texas alone. That power is wheeled to Austin or Houston on a grid that is now at times powered primarily by wind. And in March, we had a day where wind provided 48% of Texas electric power. In Washington, D.C., if you only listen to the debate we're having in this city, that's not possible, because Texas is oil, and wind obviously doesn't go with oil. It's just not true, and everybody knows it outside of Washington. California is the leader in solar, with over 10 gigawatts of installed capacity and the 6th in the world in installed solar capacity. So it gets back to the same premise that I made earlier. At the end of the day, we're a superpower because we have the best innovation in the world and because we've been able to marry both a hydrocarbon growth in hydrocarbon, where we are creating far more growth in oil and gas, at the same time that we're creating growth in renewable energy. And they go together. But what does this mean? I'm the State Department. So why is the State Department involved in these issues? And I'll get back to where I started. Because of the interconnection between energy and national security. And it's so clear today. Let me tick off a few examples. You know, I joined the Vice President Biden in 2014 when we launched the Caribbean Energy Security Initiative. Now, why were we spending so much time? And the Vice President has taken enormous amounts of his time to look at the Caribbean and Central America energy security. But if you think about it, Venezuela has used Petrocaribe as a scheme, a financial scheme, to leverage supplying oil and fuels with loans that indebt all these countries in order to leverage that for political benefit, to exact their leverage for political decisions throughout the Caribbean, our neighbors. Now you're talking about a string of islands, island states, that have 12 months of sun, many have wind, some have geothermal, some have scale and size for natural gas, and yet the vast majority are 100% reliant on dirty fuel oil from Venezuela. That makes no economic sense and makes no political sense. So we have to engage with this region in order to be able to bring about that kind of transformational change to renewable energy and natural gas, where they have the scale when they're sitting next door to the largest gas provider in the world at the best prices in the world. In Europe, Russia uses energy as their #1 political leverage in Europe. As a result of the infrastructure legacy of the Cold War, we have two Europes when it comes to energy. It's not one continent. And the EU is far from being united when it comes to energy. A portion of Europe is 100% reliant on Russia for natural gas today, and will be into the future unless we make a change. That is why Russia is willing to invest tens of billions of dollars to build new pipelines to connect that same region, to take the same gas to the same consumers through new pipelines, even when some already exist, in order to continue that linkage and dependency. Why? Because as head of state after head of state will tell me, will tell the President of the United States, and will tell the Secretary of State and the Vice President, if you don't fix my reliance on that nexus, there's nothing I can do for you. They control my economy. And yet, that is why the EU created a position, the Vice President of the European Union for Energy Union. Not because there is one, but because there isn't one. And that's why we hear about Nord Stream and South Stream and Turk Stream. Essentially, if you hear the word stream, we should be worried. That's essentially where I am. Now, that's on the negative side. But in the Eastern Mediterranean, when we've seen discoveries in Israel and Cyprus and new discoveries announced in Egypt, we have an opportunity to use energy as a common denominator to bring countries together for more and more interconnected, integrated, and create more prosperity and security in the region by doing that. And that's why you're starting to see the developments that are marrying the energy movements ahead with the geopolitics of the Eastern Mediterranean. And normalization between Israel and Turkey, a cold relationship between Israel and Cyprus for the first 50, 60 years of their existence, and now a very warm relationship, new discussions between Israel and Egypt, between Cyprus and Egypt, and what the goal that we have in the United States has been in the center of trying to encourage these kinds of conversations for the last 5 years, and because we see not only the gain for prosperity, but for national security as well. So from East Africa to the Americas, we're looking at encouraging that kind of infrastructure development. That's why I wrote an op-ed in Singapore in order to encourage an LNG hub development, so we can bring that kind of interconnected and integrated approach to Asia as well. But let me end where I started. In this room, if you're in this room today, you care about energy, you think it's important, and you probably know it better than I do. Never before have we seen that linkage between energy and national security. And if you read the pages of the Financial Times and European papers, it's on the front pages every day. Not so in the United States. We still, as a country, do not understand neither our own position in the world in energy, nor the importance of the interconnection to energy security. And what I keep saying, it's important, even if we don't want to believe the things that I said, we have to understand the rest of the world sees us that way. They already see us as that leader in energy. And they yearn for our leadership in this, and they want to continue, us to continue under that path. So I want to again thank you all for inviting me here today. I think this is an enormously exciting time in energy. I think it's the most exciting time in energy. And to be able to represent the United States as its chief energy diplomat, as Emma called me, for the last several years, I could not have picked a better job at a better time in history to be able to do that. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. We have time for just a couple of questions from the audience. If anyone would like to ask Mr. Hochstein a question.
I'm Hai Gugarat of Argus Media. In a world where U.S. is the only energy superpower, is there space for OPEC and organizations of that sort?
Of course, OPEC is a critical organization. I don't mean to suggest that they are no longer relevant, but they are no longer the leader, because I think where we are today, if you have a major cut in production in order to spur an increase in price, and you get to that, whatever that magic number that people want to guesstimate that leads to a ramp up in shale oil production in the United States, you've created that flexible ceiling where even if you cut production enough in order to generate that kind of increase by OPEC, I'm skeptical that would ever happen, but if it did, then you still have that flexible ability to increase production at a certain price that would bring on enough new production here to bring it into balance again, if you will, to the OPEC production cut. So I think OPEC is important, but I haven't seen much of ability to affect markets, partly because every member of OPEC, except for one, is at maximum capacity of production. There is nobody that can produce more today at a 60, 90-day interval that is not already doing so, except for Saudi Arabia. So it changes the dynamic of what is OPEC if you cannot affect the production levels on both sides. The second part is the democratization of the oil, which is that there are more oil producers around the world that are not OPEC members and have no interest in listening to somebody else telling them what their production level should be.
Good morning. Kwame Kane, Dentons. One area I had a question about was the World Economic Outlook, especially the role of central banks on energy throughout the world. Specifically, if we touch upon the shale energy revolution, some would argue, especially in the Financial Times, how the hot money from the low rates the Federal Reserve came to Houston, Texas, and drove that revolution. So I was wondering if you can speak about the global economic outlook, especially with the central banks and the 0% rate policy.
So I think it's a great question, because I don't think there's one element that leads to any revolution. I mean, that's the point of it's the confluence. And I think where the technology was, the drop in price and availability of the technology, with the fact that we had very high oil prices for a significant period of time. So when you have 100+ oil, a lot of technologies that were beforehand not available and not economic become economic. Combine that with very cheap money available, not only to Houston, Texas, but to throughout different pockets of the shale revolution. And you had a perfect storm of cheap money, high oil prices that everybody believed. As I said before, when the banks tell you 100 is the new floor, I can make economic models. There's almost no oil production that is not economic. And we're focusing on shale, but a lot of other oil production plays have been shelved since the reduction in price because they were economic, conventional oil plays. They were economic under $100 or not economic at $30, $40. So I think the combination of all those factors is what led us to the revolution in the first place. And I think as we see oil prices coming back up at some point, the question is also going to be, what's the strength of the dollar? What are interest rates like? How much, everybody in the oil business knows that everybody during a downturn says, this is the last time. We've now learned the lesson. We're never going to do this again. And 10 years later, we have the same conversation. So the question is going to be how that works. Now, because I believe what I said before, that we are in an energy revolution and we are no longer going to repeat the same cycles of the 1980s, 1998, et cetera, because I think that the shale revolution followed by a decline, the combination has been good for us, because the cost of shale production on both oil and gas has also come down significantly, and the efficiencies that have been achieved in oil and gas have contributed to shale being able to be a much more flexible production than it would have been had we stayed at $100 oil.
We have time for one more.
Hi, Brian Scheid with Platts. During the crude export debate, there was a lot of talk about all the national security benefits we'd see when we allowed crude to be exported. Have you seen any of those benefits so far?
Well, first of all, I'll say, as with most debates that have become national on energy, the pros and cons tend to be at the extremes, and neither one is ever right. Look, I think that the message has been very, very good. In other words, as we're looking at bringing about a different kind of energy revolution and having more on the market, I think from that perspective, I think it was a very positive step, and it signaled the ability to diversify resources. We believe fundamentally that energy security around the world for other countries is defined by diversification. And therefore, for the United States to go through a period of such growth in production, to be able to say that we are also open to exports, not only of products, but also of crude, changes that dynamic to some degree. But you and I both know that with the price of oil where it is, with transportation costs being added on, the United States it's a more narrow path for where crude is going to be economic. And therefore, with the demand in the United States still strong, we haven't seen a opening of the floodgates of oil tankers around the world, and I doubt that's going to come anytime soon. But it also enables us to be more flexible as a country, because we should be diversifying as well. And we still import heavy oils, heavy crudes from some of our neighbors, and the ability to export lighter, sweeter crudes that come out of the shale formations while we're importing others is the right way to do it. I don't believe in the terms energy independence, because it doesn't exist. There is no such thing as energy independence, because a disruption anywhere around the world affects everywhere around the world. So I haven't seen that, but I'm much more bullish on natural gas, and there we have seen a clear support for national security. The ability to achieve diversification in Europe I think, has been enhanced significantly. The shale gas revolution in the United States supported the price reduction in both Asia and in Europe, which has benefited consumers there, but also enabled the thinking around diversification to happen more rapidly. And I'm hoping that as floating LNG terminals have become so cheap, that we can now see a more flexible infrastructure that is able to receive American gas. But here's where, again, projections are wrong. When we started talking about gas exports, everybody said Europe would never see American gas. It would all go to Asia because of pricing. Today, everybody talks because of pricing. Obviously, it's not going to Asia. It's going to go more to South America and Europe. So, and that's just, I'm talking about a difference of 2 years. So I think that what I'd like to see and continue is more flexibility, more diversification, and the U.S. playing a bigger role in that process.